Good afternoon or good morning to all. Welcome to the part 3 of the American Thoracic Society webinar series entitled Technology Development, Translating Innovation from Bench to Bedside. This is a joint session organized by the Respiratory Structure and Function Assembly and the Drug and Device Discovery and Development Committee. The session is being recorded and will be available afterwards at the ATS website. Today's session is co-chaired by myself and Dr. Heidi Mansour. My name is Connie Shaw. I am a pulmonologist at the University of Texas, Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. I am also the current chair of the American Thoracic Society Assembly on Respiratory Structure and Function. Heidi.
Thank you, Connie. My name is Heidi Mansour. I'm at Florida International University at the Center for Translational Science in lovely Port St. Lucie, Florida. I'm a professor here, and I'm vice chair of the Quad D Committee, which is the Drug Device Discovery and Development Committee. And also I have a pleasure of being a member of the RSF Assembly with Connie. Glad you all can join us.
Thank you, Heidi. So in our first webinar held in April last year, we discussed the initial steps related to patent applications, moving from that to pilot funding and the resources available from the NIH and ATS, the Quad D Committee. And then in part 2 of the series, which was held in September 2021, we discussed the federal pilot funding mechanisms and dipped our toes just a little bit into the business and commercialization aspects. Now today in part 3, we will be focusing on drug development, and we have 2 presentations by distinguished speakers. Dr. Amir Ziki will present his experience with drug development and the opportunities and pitfalls, and this will be followed by Dr. Ron Shabusky, who will present his experience with startup companies. And so we are very pleased also to have an expert panelist, Dr. Rajagopal Gururajan, who is the licensing officer at University of California at Davis in the Office of Innovation Access and Innovation and Technology Commercialization. So each presentation will be about 15 to 20 minutes, and we invite the audience to post your questions in the chat box, and we'll have a Q&A session after the last presentation. So our first speaker is Dr. Amir Ziki. He is a physician scientist and an associate professor at the University of California, Davis School of Medicine and the Department of Internal Medicine. He is in the division of pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine and has over 15 years of experience with clinical and research in pulmonary physiology, biology, and pathophysiology. Through his research, he has developed the novel inhaled statin formulations, which led to 2 patents, with a 3rd one in preparation. In 2018, he co-founded the company Instatin, which is focused on developing inhaled therapeutics for the treatment of asthma and COPD, and specifically using a unique inhaled statin formulation. In 2020, he recognized that the mevalonate pathway may be important to the mechanisms of SARS-CoV-2 viral entry into airway epithelial cells. And this led to further research and subsequent founding of the company Invixa to develop inhaled statins for treatment of COVID-19. In both these ventures, he had served in multiple capacities, including as the president, the director, the CSO, CMO, and both companies have signed exclusive licensing agreements with UC Davis and the Series A funding round, with additional funding towards a forthcoming phase 1 clinical trial. So his presentation today is entitled An Academician's Journey into Entrepreneurship, Opportunities and Pitfalls. So welcome, Dr. Zicke.
Great, thank you so much, Connie, for that really nice introduction. Well, thank you very much, Connie and Heidi and the organizers. And I also want to thank my colleagues, Ron and Raj, who are participating in this webinar. And I really appreciate the opportunity that ATS has invited me to talk about this, I think, very timely and important topic. Just as a matter of housekeeping, due to bandwidth issues I have here, I'm going to just pause the video portion as I'm presenting, and then at the end of that, I'll turn the video back on just to avoid Zoom disconnecting me. So I hope that's okay. And I think hopefully you can still hear me. So just a brief outline of what I'm going to be covering today. I'll briefly talk about my journey, just to give you a bit of context and a little bit about the academic entrepreneurship landscape, at least from my perspective. And then talk a little bit about how I got started in forming the startup and the complexity of tasks that the faculty really has to be aware of and deal with, and then get a little bit into the business side of things in terms of the business model, how do you develop that, building a team, basic funding stages and sources, and then just a couple of slides on parting thoughts just to kind of bring it all together. So I think we all have to ask ourselves, if you're going to get into this, what is really the motivation? And for as long as I can remember, ever since I got into research, I've had this idea, or you can say a fantasy, that, at the end of many, many years of research, I can walk up to a patient and say, I know you've been struggling, I know you've been suffering. Some of the research that we've been working on may be a viable option for you. And that's just sort of brings closes the circle and the loop of what a physician scientist is doing, or a PhD scientist. And it's something that is sort of more aspirational. You can say it's really quaint, but it's really a deep motivation. And I've asked these questions: can my research ever lead to anything new or impactful as a novel treatment for patients? How will I actually get there? And is there a viable path forward? So just briefly, in terms of my training, I did my fellowship from 2005 to 2008 and a few training fellowships at the T32 and a mentored clinical training program. I also did a postdoc for 2 years. And then from 2010 until the present, I've had a faculty position and have been fortunate to be funded both with intramural and extramural NIH funding that has helped develop these ideas and gotten me to the point that I am here today. Without getting into too much of the details, some of the data with my a couple of collaborators who ended up becoming co-founders, we were able to generate data that was patent worthy, and as a result, we were able to form Instanton in November 2018. And then for details I won't get into here, we formed a second company in May of 2020, which was really focused on a different disease process. So Instanton is looking at asthma and COPD using inhaled drugs for the treatment of those airway disorders, and Invix is looking at respiratory viral infections, in particular COVID. And we have a couple of formulations, our lead one being INS 103, where we hope later in the year, once we close out our Series A funding round, to get to phase 1 and pursue a 505(b)(2). And that I can discuss the details of that during the panel discussion if the questions arise. We were fortunate enough to be able to secure some seed funding in the fall of 2020, which actually supported both companies. And then we are hoping that within the next month or two, we'll be closing a Series A funding round. So in a nutshell, you have there the training and then the faculty and NIH funding, which led to patents and then the formation of the company. So really in the beginning, when you're faced with this question, should I get into this? Should I put in patents? Should I form a company? I think that there's 3 key questions that I faced and that I recognized. One is, what is the significant or urgent clinical or patient need, i.e. what is the problem that you're dealing with that is important to solve? The second question is, does my solution withstand rigorous and careful scientific testing? And is the solution for this problem, is it within technical striking range, meaning that can it be developed with the available expertise within a reasonable time frame and budget? And I would say all of this is predicated, and the most important factor before you even think about putting together a company is this based on sound, strong, solid scientific foundation? So at least from my perspective, and for anyone who's getting into development of therapies, there's really three major types of therapies: pharmaceuticals, biologics, cellular therapies. Now I've divided this into sort of 1/3 and 2/3. The top third there being the pharmaceuticals is probably the easiest to develop, and it's the most widely used, and probably I would say should be the target of most startup companies. And the reason I say that is because the other two, as fascinating as they are, have much greater developmental costs. They're more complexity. They also cost more in terms of healthcare dollars. And here I speculate, I'm not sure, perhaps Ron can help with this later in the Q&A, but the IP issues and FDA regulatory approvals may be different, and the path may be a little harder, and perhaps it should be the domain of larger drug companies. So it's important to think about, if you have something that's falling in one of these three domains, you want to think about what's the path forward, and how easy is it going to be to go from a new chemical entity to clinical trials versus taking a drug and repurposing it via a different route of delivery, which is what I'm doing. And what's the pathway there? And that tends to be a little bit shorter in terms of development. Now, putting this into a little bit of context, this is really sort of a cartoon that I put together just to kind of help ground some of these different ideas and create a visual of a conceptual model that kind of puts some of these ideas together. And really the key idea here is you want to start with a solid foundation of data. That's something that's linking your science and the clinical medicine or the clinical problem. And start with the problem. What is the problem? What is the need, rather than the solution? And as you'll read and get to know this arena more, most successful entrepreneurs really focus on what people need. What is the problem? And then secondary is the solution for that problem, because the problem is king, but the solutions may be multiple, they may be many. And then you can see here how on the other two axes, linking medicine, clinical medicine, or the clinical problem to the company and the science to the company, you really have to have convincing data. You have to have a good team, scientific merit, technical capability. You have to have done the freedom to operate and get your patenting in order, and really think about, is this a marketable product? And of course, on the other side, you have to develop a realistic development strategy, look at your FDA regulatory milestones, and really develop a team that has meritorious and experienced investigators and executives. Now, this is something that's really, really important, and I'm sure most of you have heard about this, which is known as the Valley of Death. And I think it's important to discuss this here and put it into context. One is that I think most of us know that the great majority of discoveries never really make it out to patients. The average number of years of drug development from discovery to FDA approval is about 13 years. That's a little shorter than prior. It used to be 17. And I would say that 99% or more of discoveries really never make it into usable products. And there's many, many different reasons for that. But here you can see that the Valley of Death here is really not just a cash flow issue. This really has to do with available pathways to the academician in terms of getting their idea, their solution out to solving the problem in real life. And essentially, you have discovery on the left-hand side in academia, you have commercialization on the industry on the right-hand side, and the majority of discoveries really never see the light of day, as you can see there. And essentially, you have two options. What most academicians do is, we do the hard work, we get the grants, we make the discovery, publish it, and we stop there, because that's what most of us do. We don't really think about, IP, we don't think about these things, so we're really not trained to do that. But your second option is to say, look, I have this idea. I really want to see it get to patients. It's probably never going to get picked up by anyone else because you have certain, content expertise. So your options really are to seek funding from NIH in terms of small business grants, which Ron will get into as well, versus getting funding from private investors or venture capital. And again, even with that, there's many different issues and complexities that are working against you in terms of climbing up that hill to get into a successful trajectory. This is a great article that actually Ron brought to my attention. This was published in Nature Biotechnology here just a few months ago. And it's a great article. I highly recommend it. And it's a thoughtful assessment of the opportunities, pitfalls, and a checklist of what you really need to think about and go through as you're in the initial stages of thinking about building a company. This is one figure from that article. I won't get into all of this, but this really gives you a nice roadmap of all the things that I went through, and really the 5 domains of what you have to think about: the idea, the legal structure, fundraising, conflicts or potential conflict of interest, and declarations, as well as building a team. And you'll see in the forthcoming slides that I highlight most of these areas. So in terms of forming the company, you put in your record of invention, you have a patent that's submitted and pending, and you form the company. There's really 2 structures. There's a C corporation and limited liability company. And if you're planning on raising capital from investors, your best option is a C corp. And then in terms of founders and co-founders, I've been very fortunate to have worked with really great co-founders. And I think it's worth highlighting from my experiences, the experiences of colleagues and others, and just reading in the literature, that it's an important thing to think about how many co-founders do you really need. And I would say it's important to keep this number as low as possible for various reasons. The division of equity shares is also something that has to be very thoughtfully done, and that the idea is the person who has done the most work and will do the most work should have the highest equity shares. And so every additional co-founder has to be thought about in terms of, do we need this person? What is this person going to do? Is this going to be duplicate work or something truly unique? And then just expect that the roles and the equity shares will change over time. And the executive positions, in fact, are fluid in the beginning. Multiple people hold multiple roles just to try and get things moving in terms of the company. You want to, in terms of your action items, you really want to declare everything. Declare your invention, declare your conflicts, seek intellectual property whenever it's possible. Be careful not to publicly disclose your data, as this could nullify your patent application. Again, you want to work with the patent attorney and work with your university tech transfer officer, who, in my case, was incredibly helpful. And Raj here is a great resource in the Q&A, and please be sure to ask questions regarding this. Follow the university rules and policies. Declare a conflict of interest and conflict of commitment, and be ready to be reviewed and be put into what's called a conflict management plan. You're a physician or a scientist or both. You have a company. You will enter into a conflict management plan with multiple progress reports and declarations. It's incredibly important to remember that your scientific work, your abstracts and manuscripts really should be published, and forming a company should not hinder that. You have an obligation to yourself as faculty, to your trainees to do that, but be aware that this could cause some potential delays or conflict. Work closely with your tech transfer officer to make sure the dates of your declarations, your publications are covered by patents. And then in terms of negotiating licensing agreements, this is a very complicated and involved process. Getting exclusive versus non-exclusive has many different variables, but just be aware that the university is not obliged to give your company the license, exclusive or not. And their interest is to give it to the company that's most likely to develop this product once it's licensed. So this is something important. Getting some help in terms of negotiating the term sheet, which has milestones, payments, equity, royalties with the university, is going to be very, very important. This slide I won't really get into, but it shows you the litany of things and the complex issues that you have to monitor and address with your team. Obviously, you're not going to do this all by yourself, but you really have to be aware of these variables and action items: legal representation, IP counsel, corporate activities, documentation of meetings, info and data management, people management, getting your non-disclosure agreements in place, conflict resolution, equity reallocation. There's a lot of things that have to be put together and managed. And this is where building a team, as I'll talk about shortly, is going to be important. This is something that Raj will talk a lot more about when questions arise. This is the UC Davis Venture Catalyst program. And I can't thank UC Davis enough for having this program, which really got me going in terms of getting the patents through, getting IP counsel, getting the company started with all the different registrations, putting an SBIR grant, all these things was incredibly helpful. And I very much appreciate that. You can see the website below. It has multiple toolkits and programs. There's even small grants that this program offers for people just starting, and an incubator network set up, and economic engagement, which is really a fantastic program. This is another program that I highly recommend, which is the NIH I-Corps at NCAS Training Academy for academic entrepreneurship. This is designed specifically for academicians, and it's really to help you develop a business model and go through the customer discovery process and who the end user is. And it's really for anybody, regardless of the stage of your company. It's incredibly helpful. I did this course and was asked to be a co-instructor, and it's been a very, very worthwhile effort. This is the business model canvas that you'll go through. You can see there's 9 major components: value proposition, key activities, cost structures, customer segments, etc. This is a really great framework to help you understand and describe the ecosystem that you're a part of. And it really helps you look at the hidden assumptions that you haven't thought about and address gaps in your thinking and in your planning, and forces you to really think about the major aspects of your product idea from a business perspective. So this NCAS program is incredibly useful. There's an article there in Clinical Translational Science Journal, came out in 2019, that really goes through this nicely. Another aspect of this is, of course, team building. And without getting through all the details, you've seen this in other slides, but to highlight a couple of points, you're going to need people with a lot of different expertise. And one of the key ones is, depending on where you are in your stage, like my company is, commercialization know-how is critical. If you're getting into phase 1 and beyond, in my case, repurposing a drug for inhaled delivery, this is a highly specialized field in terms of inhalational science. Is something that you really want to get the best people you can in the field to work on this. I also have space, the incubator space for R&D outside of UC Davis, outside of the campus, but still in the city of Davis, which is also helpful. Now, you've all probably heard about this founder's dilemma, which is a very fascinating concept, and it is quite true, which is founders often have a hard time sort of evolving and letting go. And finding the right people for the job. Often co-founders, their positions are going to be very fluid. And the idea here is there are some trade-offs. It is very rare for a founder or co-founders to be both fully in control of the company and make it financially successful. It's often one or the other, as you can see from that 2x2 table. And there's a nice article here in the Harvard Business Review that gets into this, which is their conclusion is a founder who gives up more equity to attract investors is ultimately, at the end of the day, going to build a more valuable company than one who parts with less. And in the end, everybody wins and gets a more valuable slice of the pie. So this is an important thing to be aware of. And if you're a founder or soon will be a founder, you have to be aware of this sort of psychological trap and pitfall. Again, you want to build the best team possible. So you have to recruit the best people. So where do you find them? You need people with technical expertise, legal expertise, accounting expertise, executive experience to lead the company. And I think, getting funding may even be easier than securing the right people, especially in the current environment. It's hard to find great postdocs or people who are graduating who want to go into industry, or people who are already in industry, to attract them, to bring them to your company. Why would they do that and take that risk? And it's really important. One of the options is, if you have investors, they have their own potential hires and networks, and they may be able to put you in touch with these people. But at the end of the day, as you're trying to find people and recruit them, leadership is essential to inspire others and to share that vision that you have. Basic funding sources. Again, Ron will cover the SBIR as TTR. BARDA is another great program, which during COVID was a great program. And there's a website there, HHS. And I can get into that a little bit later if questions arise. In terms of what I went through, really started with friends and family and co-founders putting in the initial funds. And then a friend of mine connected me to some investors that allowed us to go into a seed round of funding. And of course, other options being angel investors, high net worth individuals, and venture capital. These are all options. Getting a little bit more into the weed in terms of funding stages. Friends and family is considered at the concept stage. You can see on the right-hand side there is the dollar amount that's typically seen. High net worth individuals. Proof of concept is really the seed stage, 0.5 to about 5 million. And then of course, series A, B, C, D, early and later stage, you can see that the dollar amounts really do increase as the cost of the clinical trials are there. One point of caution is not to raise too much funds at the seed stage, which can lead to too much dilution of equity at a low price or valuation. This is something from the business side that I learned that it's hard to really understand, but it's something that you want to be aware of and learn more about it. And then in terms of securing funding, it really comes down to both objective and subjective domains. You have the data, you have the accounting, but there's also the psychological aspect and personality and trust and credibility. And what investors are really looking for is confidence in the team and in the scientists. Can they execute on the idea? Is this a team that's credible? What's a realistic developmental strategy? Is there merit? Can we trust this team? And in terms of you presenting and pitching ideas, you want to be you want to be enthusiastic, but you also want to be realistic, clear, present in simple terms, aim your pitch at the audience, and really focus on the idea and the team, but still being transparent in terms of the data and where you're at into your plan. This is a great book that I highly recommend by Erwin Klaff, who's really from the trenches of raising funds. He's raised multiple billions of dollars. So he knows all about presenting, persuading, creating deals, how to pitch. He gets into the neuroscience of it, into the psychology, an absolutely insightful book, highly, highly recommended. This is essentially like the Bible of biotechnology entrepreneurship. It's a massive textbook by Craig Shimasaki. It has an incredible amount of information, more than you could ever want to know. Highly recommended as a reference. So just a few parting thoughts in the last couple of slides here. One is, this is a complex process. It's not for the faint-hearted. Chances of failure are high, but I would say, if not you, then who? If you really believe that you have something that could benefit patients, then go for it. You will make mistakes. I've made mistakes. It's inevitable, but it's part of a learning curve. Find mentors, find coaches, read, learn about the topic, work with your university TTO. Be thoughtful about co-founders and equity shares. I was very fortunate, but there are circumstances where things don't work out with co-founders, and that's something that's you have to really be careful about and use those injunctions wisely. Make sure your consultants and founders have agreements, investing schedules, and be careful with consultants. They're not all created equal, and sometimes you may get the wrong advice early on, and that did happen to us. Build a team that's oriented towards execution. Vision without execution is delusion, as I've heard multiple times from people who've mentored me in this. There's a million and one ideas, but if you can't execute, then you're not going to go anywhere. Know the strengths and weaknesses of your team members. Delegate. Don't try to do everything yourself. And be task oriented, keeping the overall strategy in mind, but know your day-to-day tasks that have to get done. And one critical point is to be really aware of the drug development timeline and any obstacles, because this is something that can slow things down, and investors are very sensitive to this issue. And finally, as I've learned from my colleagues and mentors from the business side, is the most important component of a business deal is really three things. It's the people, the assets, and the terms. Do you trust the team? Do they have a merit? Is it good teamwork? Do you have confidence in their abilities? Do you have the science and the data and the IP? And is the deal structure acceptable to everybody, with equity shares and agreements with the university and licensing agreements? Always be strategic in your thinking and in your planning. This is a very complex operation. It has many, many moving parts. You're going to need help. You have to work with others, and you got to build teams, and your teams are going to evolve over time. So it requires consistent effort. And one final thing from a mentor of mine on what entrepreneurship really requires, and it's really four things: resilience, confidence, communication skills, and an ability to execute on the vision. And I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ziki. That was a fantastic presentation. And congratulations on your success. We will take up questions later. And right now, I'm going to ask Dr. Mansour to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Ron Schabowski. He's PhD pharmacology, currently the president and CEO of Pitfalls Therapeutics, located in Florida. So a bit of background on Dr. Schabowski. He's originally from Wisconsin. He got his bachelor's from UW-Madison and then went on to University of Minnesota, got his PhD in pharmacology. He's highly experienced vascular pharmacologist and has worked in big pharma for a number of decades, leading drug development teams at companies such as Smith Kline French, Merck, and Pharmacia Upjohn. He's founded and co-founded small startup biotech companies. He was the VP of preclinical research for AFMedica in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He also was the CEO of Silaris Incorporated, which has licensed technology from Oregon Health Sciences University. And this was funded by the NIH SBIR mechanism. And now he's developing novel drug approaches in acute lung injury and Alzheimer's disease with FIU, Florida International University, with Patmos. He also served as a special government employee advisor to the FDA in Bethesda, Maryland. He served 2 4-year terms. He has a thorough, vast knowledge of the regulatory requirements to commercialize new technology. So today, Ron will explain the model he employs to identify and license novel university-based technology and commercialize that technology, starting out utilizing available NIH small business non-dilutive funding. So Dr. Schabowski, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Munzer. I'm going to share my screen now.
Indeed. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to come at this from what I call the outside in. We just heard a very nice talk by Amir from the inside out, where he's in the university already and commercializing technology. Whereas I'm going to talk about going to universities and looking for technology and figuring out how to commercialize that and how to go about that process. Okay, so universities I've recognized for decades that they have a lot of commercial potential. You've heard all kinds of stories about, fantastic discoveries that have led to new drugs and new devices. So the tech transfer offices have become very sophisticated in promoting their technology, and they're staffed by scientists and business people like we have with us today who are familiar with commercialization. And as data from 2018 shows, there was over 70 billion in federally sponsored research at universities. And the universities then, by doing that research, were able to recoup about 3 billion in licensing revenue. And that was back in 2018. So that's probably, 4 billion by now, or 3.5 billion. So there's clearly a positive correlation between the number of patents a university issues and the licenses executed. All right, thereby more startups are created and more revenues are earned. However, the government does not allow you, when you're using these SBIR and STTR grants, which I'm going to talk about in more detail, to use any of that money to file patents. So that the university has to file those patents, and they want to get that money back. And they spent over 400 million in the 2018 data, which is referenced in this website below. So there is a mechanism for them to get that back, and I'm going to describe that. So if you look at the patents issued versus the legal fees, clearly the more patents that are issued, the more expensive it is. These are a decade of data presented here, and MIT leads the way with almost 3,000 patents in the last 10 years and $250 million. Well, however, if you look at kind of the normal range, if you just pick Harvard in the middle there and go left and right, and Heidi in my university, Wisconsin, is listed there. The WARF is very active, but you see the average is about 100 patents a year and about $100 million. Okay, and so it's it's clearly very expensive to do this, and the more patents that you issue, obviously the more it's going to cost you. And one of the biggest issues with the tech transfer office is trying to decide which technology they should spend all this money on. All right, and I've had all kinds of tech transfer people actually call me up as an industry person and say, "Is this interesting? Would you spend money on this?" And it's really a major challenge to decide what you're going to take forward and what you're not. And especially with this startup explosion as depicted here. In the last 20 years, as the pharmaceutical industry has contracted, in fact, 1998 here, that was my last year in industry as the director of cardiovascular therapeutics at Pharmacy and Upjohn. And since that year, there's been an explosion of, now there's probably 1,200 startup companies existing. This is 2018 data again. And this may seem, really exciting, but on the other hand, it's so competitive now to get funds that it's really unbelievable. And so I'm going to talk about some of that competition, because there's ways to get equity-free money and ways to get equity, to give equity away. And with grants, you can at least get non-dilutive equity-free money, and I'll describe that. So really what you've got to do is, when you go into universities, you've got to figure out how you're going to get a license to this technology, okay? And often you know the innovators and you know their work from you being in the field as an industry person. But on the other hand, like at the University of Minnesota, I just went in there and I said, I'd like to see everything you've got. And then I'd like to meet with 3 or 4 innovators. And they were thrilled to do that. And you'll find that tech transfer offices are very open to that, okay? But the main thing, and Amir referenced this in his talk as well, you've got to make darn sure that you can work with the innovator. Because you're going to be working with this person for 3 to 10 years. And 3 is a really low number. It's going to be probably more like 5 to 10 years. So you've got to make sure you have a good relationship. And then secondly, independent of the innovator, you've got to evaluate the market potential and the IP of the technology, because they're always going to try to influence you that it's really maybe a little bit bigger than it really is, and you've got to decide what that market really is. And then with the innovator, you've got to discuss the ability to apply for grants, because you've got to get these small business grants in order to get these companies off the ground. We're not talking about academic R01 grants now. They can have all the R01s in the world, but that doesn't help your small company, because you've got to establish a new company, and it's either going to be an LLC or a C Corp. Often it starts as an LLC and then it's converted to a C Corp. And then you take an exclusive option to that technology from the university. You don't take the license yet, you just take the option. And I'll go into that in more detail. So following that option period, then you take the license, all right? And the universities are very familiar with this process. So what you do is you approach them and you say, well, listen, I like the innovator, I like the technology, I see the IP that you have, the market is very reasonable. I'd like to take a cashless option to the technology for 1 year. And they'll often give you that. And what that does is it excludes others from coming in and looking at that technology. That's in your hands, but you haven't spent any money. All right. That gives you time then to apply for these grants I was talking about. SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research, STTR, Small Business Technology Transfer Research, CDC, DOD, NSF, or others, DARPA. And so it gives you that time. And once granting's been awarded, then you can go ahead and make the decision to seek that exclusive license. All right. And that granting also gives you the credibility with investors down the road. If you say, I've got an NIH grant, that carries a lot of weight, as opposed to going in and saying, I just want money for my idea. Okay. So before you take the license, though, the actual license, you've got to know the terms. So you negotiate the terms when you do the option. Because if you wait to negotiate the terms till you take the license, and then you find out that the terms are unreasonable, you've wasted a bunch of time. So you've got to do that up front. And what does the university usually want? They want those patent costs back, okay? That's the first thing always, is we want our patent costs back. And that's generally $50,000 to $200,000. They don't want them back right away. In fact, I just did a license with the University of Georgia, which has tremendous terms. They don't want any money on their patent costs once you take the license for 2 years. And then when you start paying, it's only $500 a month. Because they know if you're successful, they're going to get that money. And $200,000 isn't that much money, frankly, if you sell the company for multi-million dollars to some corporation. So they're not really worried about that. They also want a royalty on future sales. And that's very reasonable to give them a 2 to 3% royalty. Milestone payments is a big area of negotiation. Some universities want big milestone payments. You just don't have that much cash early on. But where the milestone payments really kick in is when you file an IND or an IDE, which is medical device equivalent to an IND for a drug, or when you file an NDA or a PMA, which is equivalent when you actually go to market. Okay, so you've got to negotiate those milestone payments carefully. And then there's always a one-time fee to the university, generally 1 to 2% of the sale price. If you sold this to Medtronic or to Abbott or to Merck, they're going to take 1 to 2% of that, which is very reasonable. Right. And so, and then finally, in some cases, the university actually wants founders shares. And that's generally a very small amount, less than 5%. And so I'm always open to those types of discussions. But again, I stress that you've got to have these discussions when you take the option, or else you may be really surprised when you go to take the license. Now let's do a little bit of homework here on SBIRs versus STTRs, okay? First of all, to qualify, you have to have a for-profit commercial entity that's working with a not-for-profit entity, which is the university. So you have a NUCO, you've got to establish the NUCO, you've got to form a corporation, either an LLC or a C Corp, and you've got to have a bank account, because the system award management, or the EUI system, or UEI now it's called, they transfer the money. They want to see that you're for real. Okay. These grants go through the same process as academic R01s. There's a study section. It's tough. It's hard. It's competitive as can be. And the difference between the SBIR and the STTR is, for the SBIR, the PI on the grant must be principally employed 51% by the startup, whereas for STTR, the PI can stay with the university. Now, often the professor you're working with, that you found at the university, the innovator, you say, gee, do you want to join my company? Well, no, they have an academic career. They're going to stay at the university. And so you're forced then, if that person's going to be the PI on the grant, to go the STTR route. And there's some disadvantages to that financially, which I'll get into in the next slide. But both the SBIR and the STTR are non-dilutive means to finance startups. What does that mean? That means you don't owe the government any money, any equity, anything when this is done. They don't want any founder shares. They don't want any stock. They just want to support your technology. You follow all the rules. You submit all the reports, and you do this all in a very standard model that they've set up. And then once you're done, and you walk away. So it's non-dilutive money, and that's why it's so competitive. It's what people say on the street, that's the only free money. Now, to get that money, you've got to really be good, because first of all, when you submit these grants, only half of them are even scored. They're all reviewed, but only half get scored. They get triaged, it's called, and it's so disappointing when you send these in. There's 3 dates a year you can send these in. We just had one yesterday. Thank God this webinar is today, because yesterday was a very busy day, and today is kind of a relief day. And many of us are feeling that today. But only half of them actually get a score, all right, which is disheartening. Now, there's a number of different phases of these grants. Phase 1 is really small, 150 to 200,000. You don't need any data in the rules, but everybody knows if you don't have data, you don't have much of a chance of getting the grant. And so you're really, if you can get some data from the innovator that you put in the phase 1, you really have a leg up, and you write a really good, all it is a 6-page application. There's no commercialization plan, nothing like that. So that's a really good starter. And the most success I've seen is when you get a phase 1 and then you go to a phase 2, because that's really the traditional route. And the phase 2 can be $1 to $2 million. But there's 2 other programs that they've started in the past few years. It's called Fast Track, where you can submit both the phase 1 and 2 in one application. And these are tough to get, but they happen. And I think Heidi and I actually had one of these for the company Silaris you mentioned. And it's very competitive. Or you can go directly to phase 2. If you feel that your innovator has enough data that would have replaced what would have been a phase 1, then you can just jump right to phase 2. And these grants are $1 to $2 million each, generally 2-year grants like the phase 2. The phase 1s are generally 1-year grants. Then there's another program, the phase 2B, which is really just an extension of phase 2. You need more time to get to commercialization, to get to IND enabling. And then there's been a lot of work to try to get the NIH recognizing that there's some more supporting more IND enabling work, and therefore they've come up with the CRP program, which is there's another $2 to $3 million that allows you to, and you can apply for this money as soon as you have a phase 2 award. So for instance, you want to do your path tox so you can get into your phase 1 clinicals, you can use the CRP for that. So comparing these, I mentioned that there's a lot more money in the SBIR. It's 3.2% of the NIH budget, whereas the STTR is less than 0.5%. There's some other language here about partnerships, work requirements, and then what I mentioned about the PI, you must be more than 50% with the small business versus you don't have to be in the small business for the STTR. So what else is available then besides grant funding? Okay, because that's what comes next. Okay, now you've got NIH funding, you're a PI, you're feeling good about yourself, but boy, you're out of money again. Now you got to go to angel investors. And angel investors are groups of wealthy individuals willing to risk their money. And they love to sit around and throw darts. And it's kind of a game with many of them. And it's a fun game. And they'll give you cash for stock, or they'll give you a loan that you can repay later. It's called convertible debt. And that's a better deal for the NUCO because you don't have to come up with your valuation right away. Whereas if you're going to give cash, if you're going to take cash, you better know your valuation. And here's how the dilution happens. If you say your valuation is 10 million and you're seeking in this seed round 2.5 million, you just diluted yourself 25%. Here, if you go to convertible debt and you go to a much higher valuation because now you've made significant progress, and then you give them the stock, you may have only diluted yourself 10 or 15%. Of course, the convertible debt comes with interest as well, so everything has its issues. But this is how the angel network works, and they're all over the United States. And in fact, I'm getting ready for Friday. I get 5 minutes with the angel group that I'm talking to. And I'm very excited about that 5 minutes. Now, once you have angel money and you've made substantial progress, now you start talking to VCs. You can talk to VCs now, but they don't want to talk to you basically until you have phase 2 clinical data. In some cases where you have really outstanding work that's in high medical need, like COVID, for instance, you may be able to get the VCs interested early, but they mostly want to do A and B rounds. And then further down the road, as Amir talked about, C and D rounds. But what you really got to do, because this is the valley of death, moving from angels to VCs that Amir was talking about. That's the valley of death, is getting from this money to this money. And the way to bridge that valley is with corporate partners. So you've got to be out seeking corporate partners right away from the day you start. You've got to be going to meetings, meeting people, talking, networking, and trying to get a corporation to support you. Because they have the ability then, if they support you, to take that technology at the end. Because all they're really buying at the end is the intellectual property. Okay, they're not buying your good looks, they're buying your patents so that they can go ahead and develop what you want to develop. And they are the bridge to the valley of death. Here's the same paper that I had. It's all obviously an outstanding paper. Entrepreneurs love it. I won't say much more about it because Kamir already did, but I really suggest you read this because it really lays out all the steps and it's beautifully done. Art Klausner is a former VC, and if you look at this in the affiliations, he's now in a startup. So he loved the startup so much it appears he went into it himself. And he's a neat guy. Used to be with Pappas in North Carolina. So I'll finish with this. This is the best day of your life as an entrepreneur when your associate comes in and says, you got a NOGA, a Notice of Grant Award, and you flip out over your desk and your innovator's happy, your founders are happy, and this is what you've been working for. So we just found out today that the pay lines for Alzheimer's, which we just applied for, are really high right now because of all the funds they put into that. So we're very hopeful that all the work we did this week will pay off. So I'll stop with that and take any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Schabowski.
Thank you.
Wonderful talk from both of our speakers. So now it's my pleasure to introduce, as we go into the Q&A, first I'd like to introduce our expert here, Dr. Raj Guru-Rajan. He's a senior licensing officer at the University of California, Davis, Innovation Access. And this provides the services that connect research to the marketplace and is focused specifically on protecting and commercializing intellectual property. So a bit of background, he received his PhD in biochemistry from the University of Iowa. So we got another Midwesterner here in Iowa City, and did his postdoc at St. Jude's Children's Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. He's also a registered patent agent admitted to practice before the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. As the lead officer for intellectual property management at UC Davis Medical Center, he manages a diverse portfolio of medical and biotech-related inventions, including drugs, devices, and methods. His responsibilities include evaluation of inventions, patent management, marketing, and licensing of UC Davis technologies, and supporting UC Davis startup companies and intellectual property-related outreach activities. So his experience before the UC system, he worked at Insight Pharmaceuticals, where he managed new gene discovery programs and had active role in drug discovery programs. He has decades of experience, more than 15 years of research experience in the areas of molecular biology, biochem, genomics, bioinformatics, and protein chemistry. So welcome, Dr. Raj. And now we can, I'm going to certainly feel free to give a few words, Dr. Guru Rajan. And after that, we'll open up Q&A. And Dr. Guru Rajan can field those questions, or if there are specific ones for the speakers, we can field them to each speaker. So. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you so much for your introduction, Heidi and Connie, and thank you so much to ATS and Amir and folks for inviting me here in this webinar. So mainly, I think most of the things that our illustrious speakers have already covered during the last few minutes. I just wanted to emphasize on the services that are critical to startup formation as well as attraction into commercialization. One of the critical elements is the university support. And I think both Amir as well as Ron had emphasized this important foundational aspect that's required to get companies on their feet. So with regards to UC Davis, we do have several programs. So starting from encouraging faculty to explore the world of startups, and then actually transitioning them into actually forming companies as well as supporting further activities once they have formed their startup. So I won't go into the details of these programs, but I think our sister unit here at UC Davis, Venture Catalyst, has been instrumental in putting these programs in place. And a lot of the startups and at UC Davis, we average about 10 to 14 startups every year. I'm happy to say that I've supported many of these startups, and many of these have originated. Most of them have originated from med school. So with that, I think I'll interject and then provide my comments later on, but just pass on to the question session without further delay.
Yeah, so now we'll open up to Q&A. Thank you so much, Raj. That was great. I also want to thank you, Dr. Krim, for reminding us that we, at the next ATS meeting coming up in May, we have the Respiratory Innovation Summit. And this is a great opportunity for folks here who are interested in learning the process, meeting with potential startup companies, VCs. So please consider joining us there. This will be an exciting time. We've had it before, great attendance and great learning experience. And now we'll be part of the ATS actually. So I just wanted to put that plug in. So yeah, now we can open it up to questions or things that folks in the audience might want to learn more about. You can type in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and speak through your microphone. Okay. Well, I'll chime a question in here for Raj. Can you describe some of the various technologies that you've been involved in licensing during your time at UC in terms of?
Sure.
Diversity of it. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think at UC Davis, I think we do, as a campus itself, we have several disciplines. So including, of course, the med school, which is in Sacramento. So we do, and through our office, we get quite a few inventions in diverse areas, and these would include not only medical technologies, but also interdisciplinary technologies that actually are involving, say, biomedical engineering, new therapeutics from the Department of Chemistry, or, of course, so agriculture, or more so technologies that, like the newer ones, like stem cell therapies in the medical field, and likewise, I think the microbiome and more of the kind of the translational biosciences. So on the average, we get about 140 invention disclosures at UC Davis. Majority of them tend to be at least close to about 40 to 45% tend to be from the med school. So personally, I manage, I think about total of about 140 inventions, mostly in the med school, of course. Yeah, so I think 99% of my portfolio is from the med school. So that involves not only therapeutics, we also support devices, we also support research tools. So there's a whole gamut of them that we get from the med school.
Excellent, thank you. I had a question for Amir. You mentioned you first went to family and friends for funding. Can you give some advice how you approach the topic and how you lure friends and family to give substantial amounts of their personal money to your endeavor?
Mine was kind of a unique situation, actually. So besides myself and co-founders putting in a little bit of cash just for administrative stuff, I went to my best friend from college, actually, who I've been in touch with for over 30 years. I mean, and I basically, and he's a businessman, he's an investor, he does oil and gas, but he's done a little bit of in medical devices. And I just basically pitched him the idea. I said, this is what's going on. And we were in the COVID situation as well, so things had evolved. And he put me in touch with some of the people that he knows that he's invested with, and I just basically pitched them. Just a brief phone conversation. They were interested and excited. They liked the fact that it was farther along than most, like not a new chemical entity, but it was a repurposed drug via a different route of delivery. So, and their calculus was this is something that they could see a fairly reasonably quick turnaround, as quick as drug development goes. And of course, it's not as fast as we want, but so it was really through a personal contact, and then I had access to his network, and now we're working on Series A. I also did apply for an SBIR, actually got a good score before I approached my friend and was going to resubmit it, but then we ended up getting funds from the investors, so didn't have an immediate need to resubmit the SBIR. And then that's basically how it happened. So it was kind of a hybrid situation. It was really more of a, entering at the seed level, but it was through a personal contact, which is one of the points I made in the slides is, a lot of people, and just think about your larger network and who knows who. And there are wealthy people in your network who might be interested. And the reason it helps is because if they know you and trust you, it circumvents a lot of the issues that investors have in terms of putting their money with a team or a group of people that they don't really know well, right? So it's just on the psychological side of things, it's helpful if you go through contacts that happen to have access to a network like that.
Excellent. Very helpful. Thank you. I had a question for Ron, unless Connie wants to chime in, but I had a question for Ron if I could. You mentioned corporate partnerships. Any tips or advice how to go about getting corporate partnerships established?
Well, Amir just touched on it a little bit. It's really a matter of networking, and you got to go to meetings. And many meetings now have these one-to-one meetings they set up with corporate people, and those are really important to go to those. And with COVID now, it's been harder to do that. They're doing some of that again now, virtually, and face-to-face is going to start again, I hope. But that's one good way, is the big major scientific meetings have realized that people like us need to figure out how to talk to those people. You know, I went as far recently as signing up for InLinked Premium so I could contact anyone, and you can get all the decision makers at Medtronic, for instance. And I sent a bunch of emails, and in one of Amir's notes, he said in one of his slides, don't let your impassioned moments drive you. Well, I had one of those impassioned moments where I sent 10 emails to 10 different decision makers, and I haven't heard a thing now in 2 weeks, you know, so that doesn't work very well. So you really got to get face to face. You've got to get introductions, and you know, it's all about networking and you know, finding people. Like, we send people off to these companies, and so then we call those people and say, hey, can you take this to this guy or this gal, and you know, promote this technology a little bit, because you know, they're not out really they don't know who we are. We only know who they are, right? Mm-hmm. And we're just little people. But where do the big companies get most of their innovation? It comes from the little people. Okay.
Right.
They keep publishing data. I don't know why they keep spending so much money on R&D when they publish all this data showing that most of their major innovations are all licensed, or in license, I should say, into their company. So, and out licensed from us. So I think it's difficult. It's difficult to sell. If you don't have tenacity, you're not going to make it in this business. You got to just keep at it all the time. And you lay in bed and you think, who should I contact? Who should I contact? You know?
And I will add to that. That's absolutely true. I will add to that UC Davis set us up with the JP Morgan meetings, the bio meetings, where we go to San Francisco, and I had a bunch of rapid fire meetings. That's before I had any contact with my friend or any contact with investors. Went there, did some pitches, and I actually got a lot of useful contacts in terms of regulatory CROs, other companies that then later, once we were able to get funding and a team, some of those contacts from that meeting, actually, we hired to do some of the work. So
good. Yeah. You know, the death knell is when you see it coming on their lips, you're too early, and you just, you know, you go, oh no, here it comes.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's just so disappointing.
Great.
So I have a question. Maybe actually for Courtney Krim, for this Respiratory Innovation Summit, do you know if there are opportunities for one-on-one speed dating kind of rounds with potential founders?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, that's what we hope will happen, is that we will have periods of time set aside at the summit where people can have one-on-one conversations with either companies that are presenting, as well as with the venture capitalists that will be there. So again, that's we hope to have that. So we'll have, besides the companies presenting, we'll have periods of time set aside where they can have these one-on-one conversations, because that's where the real, rubber meets the road, with those one-on-one conversations, so to speak.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there was a question from Courtney. If you'd like to ask your question, Courtney, for Ron or Amir.
Yeah, I mean, Amir had responded to me directly, but you may just want to repeat the question, Amir, and that way everyone on the audience can hear your response.
Yeah, I think you asked me about the initial request for cash. Is there a minimal amount of funds required for the initial startup work? That was your question, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and my response, at least from my experience, and certainly Ron can speak to this as well, and Raj has experience as well. There is no minimal amount, but what we did is we created a budget for what we thought we needed. We presented this to the investors with a valuation. We looked at the percent dilution, as Ron so importantly and astutely pointed out. That's a critical issue. And then we went to them, and they said, well, we want to give you double that. It was actually, they wanted to give us 4 times the asking amount, because they in their assessment, we needed a lot more money than what we thought we needed. We ended up using only half of the amount that they were willing to give us for various reasons. And so it's complicated by the fact that the simple way of thinking about it is, here's the budget of what I think I need to do the company work to get me to the next level, whatever it is. But the reality is, if it's not non-dilutive funding, if it's dilutive funding, the valuation, that the whole thought process of what's the company worth now And what you're asking is critical because of the dilution and the equity shares that's going to happen. And then there's another level of thinking, which is if I'm valued at this X dollar today, I'm getting diluted by this much. If I want to get to Series A and I want to get to clinical trials, I'm going to need X number of dollars, and there's going to be that much more dilution depending on that valuation. So there's this kind of, sort of financial way of thinking that I'm certainly not expert at, and I've had to learn it from the finance guys, that makes this a sort of a more complicated way of approaching it. It's not as simple as creating a budget. When things are being diluted, you have to think, both proximally as well as a little bit more medium term. And I'd love to hear what Ron has to say about this, because I'm much less experienced.
Well, I agree. It's, the toughest thing is when you look across the table and some angel or VC says to you, well, what's your valuation? And it gets real quiet then because now the wheels start turning and you're doing the math. And, that's why this whole convertible debt thing, comes into play, because you don't have to know your valuation. You just need to know your valuation cap. All right. And so you can kind of squeeze by the question at that point, and you can still get the money as a loan, as opposed to just diluting yourself right away. Okay. Yeah. But what you say about they gave you double the money you want. Just the other day I met with a VC, and he said, well, what's your seed? And I go, 2.5. He goes, well, we only do 5 million. Too bad. And I went, well, hold it. We could talk about that, because we set it up on milestones. And so if you make your milestone a little bigger, then that number becomes a little bigger. But as Amir pointed out, you don't want to, in the seed round, you don't want to go for too much money or just dilute the daylights out of yourself. So you got to be able to do math in order to, not just science, in order to do this.
Yes. So in the ballpark, I would say just enough to meet your budget, but then have enough cushion so that you have the extra money just in case.
I think that's where I was going with my question, because again, as Amir mentioned, he actually needed more than what he had in his budget. So is there some factor that you would increase above what you think you need so that you can make sure you have enough?
I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. Maybe one way of approaching it is getting back to what Ron was saying about the valuation. The way that the valuation was done, at least from the investors I was dealing with, is they looked at the total number of NIH dollars that I got to get me to the point where I'm at.
Yeah.
And they basically took that dollar amount and they just multiplied it by like 2.5 or 3. And they said, that's the valuation. We believe that for this amount of NIH dollars, it's actually 3 times as much as that. Then they negotiated and they did whatever it is they do in order to, sort of satisfy the budgetary needs, but also not dilute too much. I mean, we were diluted for sure, but I'm not sure if that answered your question. But that's one way of thinking about it.
Well, and the patent portfolio comes into play too, not just the NIH grants, okay? And so they look at that as well, and and what are those patents going to be worth? Well, a hell of a lot, because that's what you're selling down the road, is you're selling your intellectual property. Okay.
Courtney, I don't know if that answered your question, but please reiterate if not.
No, that answered my question. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, Heidi, could you put up the slide with the references?
Yeah, so thanks everyone. That was great discussion, great information. We are gonna now share the screen. Got some good references here that our experts gave us.
Yeah, we are actually over time. So we just want to share some of these references that would be very useful. But if you did not have time to record this, don't worry, because they will be available as part of the recording at the ATS website. So on behalf of the American Thoracic Society, the Drug and Device Discovery and Development Committee, and the Respiratory Structure and Function Assembly, we want to thank the speakers and our panelists for their really really fantastic presentations and discussions, really insightful. We also appreciate the organizational assistance from Bridget Nance and ATS staff, without whom we really could not hold this session. Here's the second slide with the reference cited. And then last but not least, I want to thank the audience for your participation. Please send your comments and suggestions to any one of us, and they will be really helpful in shaping the future sessions in this series. And this last slide that Heidi had flashed, we want to remind you to attend the 2022 American Thoracic Society International Conference in beautiful San Francisco, and also to register for the Respiratory Innovation Summit. With that, we will adjourn and have a wonderful week wherever you are. Thank you, everybody.